Yeah, that's right, Wolf. It's quite unprecedented. However, I think there's a reason why Janet Yellen did this. I think she's trying to help her successor. I think there are a lot of people out there in the market who say, well, if the Fed cuts, they're only reacting to political pressure from the White House. And I think Janet Yellen wants to help preserve the credibility of the Fed by saying, no, it's the right thing to do. There are actually some good reasons for cutting interest rates. So I think she's just trying to help.
The fact that that's even needed, though, does that not highlight the extraordinary position we're in? Do you think it's even plausible that the current Fed chair asked for her help in this way?
Well, I'm not sure he asked for it, but I think he was probably quite glad to hear what she had to say, because this actually reflects recent Fed communication. I mean, he went out of his way to talk about the need for an insurance cut, warning about global uncertainties, the global slowdown that is still unfolding. And these are exactly the words that Janet Yellen repeated. So I think, this may not have been coordinated, but it's certainly welcome by the current Fed leadership.
Yeah, I mean, we're already in unprecedented times where the president weighs in on the Fed on Twitter constantly, not to mention just days before a Fed meeting. Joachim, does that ultimately influence the Fed in any way, or does it make the stakes higher for tomorrow based on how President Trump is going to react? Because we know he's going to.
Well, Sarah, I don't think this influences the Fed's decision. I think there are good reasons for the Fed to cut interest rates. They've been talking about this for quite a while. They are following the economic data. Also, it's an exercise in risk management, given the global slowdown. And also, there's a good reason to cut because inflation has consistently fallen short of target. And there is a risk that inflation expectations get anchored significantly below the target. So I don't think this is a reaction to what the president has been asking for. I think the Fed is doing the right thing. And the real question is it going to be 25 or 50?
What's your take on this, Grasso?
So I would have thought that Janet Yellen would be helping Powell by saying that they weren't due for a cut. Because the perception is that President Trump has pushed him into a cut and that we shouldn't have a cut and he's doing something against his will. So I don't know if this is directly helping Powell as much as it is helping Trump, which is probably a little bit ironic at this point.
You mean it's putting pressure on Powell to cut when he didn't want to?
Well, I think that she's backing the Trump dynamic of that we do need a cut. And we've seen the Fed come out on both sides of this. We've seen Powell change gears, and obviously now he's a dove. But we saw Rosengren come out, and he's a screaming hawk, right, on that Friday interview. It seemed to be right before the blackout of the Fed. So I think if Janet came out and said we shouldn't be cutting, that would probably back Powell more, because the perception is that Powell doesn't really want to cut. He's only cutting because the president.
It would only back him if he then didn't cut. But I think the expectation
you could have made the case for this cut.
It shows that a monetary authority, a former Federal Reserve chairperson, supports a cut. Forget the politics.
There's
of it.
been lack of inflation from the time she was raising to the time when Powell wanted to raise. There's been zero inflation. The Phillips curve is dead. There's been a reason to not raise rates. You can't normalize. What I'm nervous about is the fact that they don't have any ammo at this point to further their endeavors. In case we do run into a recession, you need 5 or 6% to cut down to zero. We don't have that ammo anymore.
Finally, yeah, I mean, that's out there. The mystery, I think, is in what message Powell will deliver on the cut. Will this be a start of an easing cycle? Will he hint at more cuts as the market expects? Or will he say, OK, we did our job. Let's see what the data tells us. And is the market going to be OK with that? I mean, it's the framing of it that I think leaves some room for interpretation.
Is that a question for me, Sarah?
Yes. What do you expect?
Yeah.
What do you expect him to say around it?
Right. So I think it's going to be a dovish 25 basis points cut. They may go 50, but I think it's more likely 25, but with dovish language. They will probably also announce along with it that they end quantitative tightening already this month in July rather than in September as previously planned. So I think he will leave the door open to another cut. Otherwise, I think he would risk disappointment in the market.